Hey guys, welcome to the Orthodox Christian podcast. We had a question come in on the form that I wanted to address concerning the Sunday of Orthodoxy and the anathemas that are pronounced. But before that, just a disclaimer, I'm not a priest in the Orthodox Church. This is just my opinion. I do always recommend getting to know a local community of Orthodox Christians and then meeting with the leadership if you have further questions, because the Orthodox Church is something embodied and instantiated locally. It is not primarily on the internet. However, I am always happy to answer questions. So Amy wrote in and said, and I should say thank you for your question, Amy. She said, why do Orthodox Christians delight in declaring anathema, in parentheses, formal religious curses, upon those with whom they disagree? It seems the Orthodox Church does not practice its key principles of forgiveness and non-judgment. So thanks again for your question, Amy. And for those who may not be aware, right now in March, we just celebrated the Sunday of Orthodoxy. And on that Sunday, usually there are anathemas pronounced against those that denied the significance of icons primarily, as well as some other theological topics. And so it clarifies, I think, the way of life versus the way of death. At least this is one way to think about it. So why do Orthodox Christians delight in declaring anathema? Just a bit more background to this. Anathema is used in the New Testament. So, for instance, St. Paul will say, anathema, if anyone preaches a gospel different to the one that we have preached to you, in Galatians. And at the end of 1 Corinthians, Christ says, if anyone does not love Christ, let them be anathema or cursed. And so I think that the purpose of these anathemas is for the sake of Christians, because this happens in the context of the service or the liturgy. It's not as if Orthodox are just going out into the streets and saying anathema to you, anathema to you. Rather, it is a way to show the guardrails on this way of life that we are treading. It is also important to say that anathema is not somehow manifesting a curse on this person or like calling down a curse on this person. I think it's just an observation that this way is cursed, that there are ways that we can veer off the path of life. And so why this is important with icons is we aim sort of the hidden parts of ourselves, like our hearts, with the physical things around us. And so this is why it's important in a marriage to hug your spouse, to kiss your spouse, to act in a loving way, regardless of your feelings, because the more you act in this way, the more your heart will be aligned with those actions. This is good advice in general, like whether or not you feel like going to the gym, you should go to the gym if it is a healthy thing for you. Whether or not you feel like eating healthy, you should do it. And then the rest of your life will sort of integrate into that way. So we lead with actions, and our actions are tangible, they are embodied, they are physical. And so it's really important that we do have images, that we do have icons in the Christian life, because we are using these things to orient our hearts and our minds and the things of ourselves that are less physical towards God. And we live in a society where images are all around us. There are images of the ideal life when you look at TV or when you look at a poster, and this is very common. And so within Orthodoxy, it is part of the brand to have icons, and this is for good reason, because we aim the hidden parts of ourselves with the physical things that we do with our actions. So why do we say anathema to those that were against icons? Because this is a way that does not lead to life. This is the way of death. This is not helpful in our walk with Christ. It's not because we feel so superior and we're looking down and saying, well, I'm great up here, because that would be the sin of arrogance. It is a vice. It is the worst vice that we can have. And yet, it is very instructive to see how we can go off the rails, how we can depart from the way of life. And so at once, I think the anathemas and the Sunday of Orthodoxy is celebratory because it's done in thanksgiving for the victory of the proper Orthodox belief. And so it's celebratory in the same way that we celebrate the victory of World War II. It is a good thing that the proper way of life triumphed and an improper way to understand Christianity in Orthodoxy did not succeed. This is something to be thankful for. And on the other hand, it is exemplary and it shows us what not to do. And sometimes it is easier as humans to think about what not to do than what we should do. And so this is why it's important to dwell on vices, for instance, and not just think about virtues, though that is also helpful, but we ought to consider what is negative as well, so that we are oriented. And that negative example serves as like the guardrail on our way towards God. And then the other thing to mention is that throughout this time of Lent, one of the common things that Orthodox are saying to themselves constantly, or in the church setting, is the prayer of Saint Ephrem, which says, like, give me not these vices, grant rather these virtues, and help me to basically see my own sins, see how I am wicked, see how I need to repent, and not to focus on other people and trying to change them. And so I think in Orthodoxy, it's not necessarily the case that people delight in declaring the anathemas because they think they are superior, although everyone has sins that they are struggling with. And just because someone is part of the Orthodox Church does not mean they are immune to sin suddenly. So, of course, people will misuse this and use it as a reason to become arrogant and snobbish towards other groups of Christians. But I think the primary emphasis, when taken as a whole, is for the body of Christians to orient themselves properly towards God and to think in terms of how they can go off the rails and not actually follow God correctly. So this would be, I think, the primary emphasis, or the way that we can understand it and make sense of these anathemas. And then in terms of these key principles of forgiveness and non-judgment, I think that the key principle of forgiveness is absolutely there in Orthodoxy, in the sense that forgiveness is the extension of life into death. This is what it means for God or Christ to forgive sins. It means that he becomes incarnate and extends his life to death when he descends to the realm of the dead and retrieves Adam and Eve and all those who are held captive by death and lifts them out, because humanity has departed from the way of life and has strayed, and Christ goes on this mission to rescue them. This is forgiveness of sins. And so how is Orthodoxy the church that forgives sins? I think it is because it is the church primarily of the martyrs. Like, of all the church traditions that exist today, I would argue that Orthodoxy has the strongest emphasis on martyrdom, both in its commemoration, but then also in its adherence to things like fasting and prayer and ascetic practices that in Lent are very much par for the course. It is like a soft martyrdom, or sort of living out of that spirit when we abstain from certain foods and are very strict with ourselves, but we also commemorate the martyrs. And this is also, I think, the forgiveness of sins, in the sense that the martyrs are the ones who die, and in dying are extending life into death. They are the continuation of Christ's death and resurrection. They are the seed that plants the church and allows it to spread and to grow. So I think that this spirit is very, very much alive within Orthodoxy. And then in terms of non-judgment, I don't know that non-judgment is really a virtue. I think that there is judgment in the church. There is this sense of, like, here's the way of life, here's the way of death. Keep on the way of life. Keep going in this direction. And if you are going to have standards that you're looking at the world through, just make sure that you are living up to those standards, and primarily apply them to yourselves as a medicine. Don't misuse them as this club to go and hit other people with. However, there is nothing wrong with saying that there is a way to life, there is a way to death. There are ways that we can destroy ourselves, and it's important to be able to say, this practice that other people are engaging in is not a way to life. And now, what's the point of that? To apply it to ourselves. So I think that non-judgment we have to understand as, it can be easy for the zeitgeist of our time, like the spirit of the age, to seep into Christianity, which is just about, like, tolerance and everyone's the same and there's no right way or wrong way. Like, this is not Christianity. But it is important in Orthodoxy that we apply the standards primarily to ourselves and don't deceive ourselves and become arrogant and start just looking down on other people, because in this life, we have an opportunity to save ourselves by God's grace as we cooperate and actually instantiate what it means to be a Christian in our lives through concrete actions. And so if we use these examples to aid us, great. If we instead get deformed and twist it up and become arrogant, well, then it falls apart. But this, I don't think, is in the proper spirit of Orthodoxy. So when you go to an Orthodox church, if you're inquiring, if you're looking at it for the first time, and you go to, say, the Sunday of Orthodoxy, and you hear these anathemas against non-Orthodox practices, you have to put that within the proper context, in the sense of, this is happening in the Orthodox Church, like in the liturgy. What is the purpose of this? It is primarily for the Orthodox themselves to orient themselves. And then you've got to place it into this wider context of Lent, where every day we are praying the prayer of St. Ephrem, which focuses on how we are sinful and how we need to be saved. And so I think that when you frame it in that sense, it's helpful, and it will perhaps allow you and me and other people to engage with it with a good spirit. So it's a very, very good question, Amy. So thank you for submitting it, and I hope that I've been somewhat helpful. If you or anyone else has further questions about Orthodox Christianity, feel free to use the link in the episode description. And in the meantime, I hope that you have a peaceful week. Take care.